Welcome to my friend the Rainbow Circle. Continuing my idiosyncratic horror movie top 10. I did want to talk about a movie called Honeymoon, which sort of flew under the radar. It's the type of movie. I have the Halloween lighting on. It's the type of movie that I call hyperschematic or hyposchematic, I guess would be the more appropriate way to say it. Really the factors in the rainbow circle to really always consider the visceral core, and that's part of what makes a horror story really successful, is spiking the much more pure sort of visceral imagery. Extreme violence, weird sort of distorted imagery that you see in giallo movies, like I talked about in the last episode. And that paradoxical level, the elimination of the facade to access the more animalistic side, that sort of thing. But the schema is very important. The schema is the internal rule system. That's level 3. The schema is the internal rule system. And I created an internal rule system just for this top 10 list. No canon movies, no movies that are obscure and designed just to make me seem cool, which I clearly am not. And no, ironic movies. And I think I'm picking a lot of recent movies because this Honeymoon was, I think, from 2014. I'm picking recent ones because I can be sure they're probably not on any list. Older movies, like Opera I picked last time, that's probably on somebody's top 10 list. From the 70s, or no, Opera's from the 80s. Most giallo movies are from earlier, but that was from the 80s. But 2014, I got a good chance. Nobody's put this on the list, on any list yet. Like it matters. But the micro schema or hyposchema, the internal rule system that you have with a horror movie, it obviously you have that in giallo and thrasher movies. That's kind of a well-documented aspect of them. What do you expect from a thrasher movie pretty much every time? Any other sort of subgenre of horror, you have plenty of other micro schema. But you have a particular type of horror movie that ratchets it way, 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 way down to a very limited sort of situation. And I think that's part of the magic of, like, The Shining even is does this, even though Shining has lots and lots of other things going on. But The Shining, it's about 3 people in a hotel, and because the schema has really ratcheted it way down to just those 3 people. Little elements can be really terrifying because for sure there's nobody else in there. A lot of the imagery in The Shining is scary because it's, terrifying. But, that moment when you see the 2 little girls, is that scary because it's 2 little girls, or is it scary because, based on the schema, the rule system that you have for the hotel, there's not supposed to be anybody else there? And you have movies that I think, especially like found footage movies, that are low budget and are going to have a smaller cast just by their nature of being extremely low budget. Like Blair Witch Project, really famously. That's 3 people mainly, little other parts here and there. Paranormal Activity, buried micro schema. And that's the amazing thing about those movies. Plenty of people complain about those movies. I'm not sure they would make anybody's top 10 necessarily. Maybe top 10 most popular. I don't know, something like that. But the amazing thing about those movies, they are impressive, certainly. They're very impressive because if you really look at them, barely anything ever happens. But they work. I'm not going to deny that they work. The story might be a little sloppy here and there, but they absolutely work. And I think you can learn a lot just even taking a look at something that you might dismiss up front and say, how does it actually work? Paranormal Activity works in this amazing way because it's ratcheted it down so much, so hyper focused just on the couple or whatever, or the family, just whichever paranormal activity you're talking about, so that barely anything happening is something happening. So it's a movie where a door moving slightly elicits a visceral response, and that's amazing. But that's all down to the schema. It's just really the rule is here is the normal situation. The normal situation is this door is not going to move. We focus on it for a long time, and then the door moves. Little things like that. And then the first movie, she just stands there. It's scary because she's doing nothing. But it's so just ratcheted way down that little things become very scary. And that's impressive. And I think it works better in a movie like Honeymoon. And Honeymoon has lots of weird twists and turns, but sort of the concept is that you have the couple, and there are a couple. There's this other couple, but there's a few other characters here and there. But for the most part, it's just a 2-character movie, and that's what's really impressive about it. How much they really get out of essentially just 2 characters talking. There are a few other genres where that really works. Dramas, stage dramas. You really don't have movies that do that. Famously, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf was able to do that, and Edward Albee was very annoyed that they got in a car and they went somewhere else. But imagine really most movies being about 2 people just in a house. could a just straight up drama get away with what Paranormal Activity does? Because there's no disruption of the schema that really works effectively there. But there are a handful of dramas that are just 2 people essentially. But it works better on the stage. But anyway, not to get sidetracked on non-scary things, but in Honeymoon, it's mainly about the wife, the wife and the newlywed couple, going through these physical changes. So it's body horror, and just going through these psychological changes and all that sort of stuff, and the guy sort of getting paranoid about that. And there are these lights outside, and they're not really sure what the lights are. And it's really atmospheric. It's really well done, and really this micro focus on this couple in this basic dynamic. The story is really basic. Great horror stories, you don't really need something any more complicated than just, husband's new wife. It's going through these physical changes and seemingly turning monstrous. What's going on? But anyway, and it's got another great ending, which is just it's one of the things I love about opera. I mean, opera's got the great bird scene and the great ending. Very satisfying defeat of a villain in the end of opera. For me, at least. The total opposite with Honeymoon. Spoiler alert. It's an ending that reminds me a bit of Funny Games. Funny Games is another one. I think I've seen Funny Games on a couple of different lists. So, Funny Games is amazing, but it's just definitely one of those where it's a name droppy sort of movie, but it has shown up in a bunch of lists. But there's a scene in one of my favorite scenes in Funny Games. Right at the end, you think it's it might be ramping up to a battle or something between the last survivor, spoiler alert on that movie too, and the killers, and they sort of just a great moment of bathos. I've talked about bathos before, but they sort of just dunk her over into the water. But yeah, Honeymoon has a similar sort of scene. Spoiler alert. The wife has been taken over by aliens. she does these horrible visceral things to herself, um, and it's very it's very disturbing, sort of body horror type of stuff going on. I won't say how she stabs herself. Very disturbing, very viscerally impactful. But at the end, she takes the husband out in the water and and ties a weight to him and just dumps him over. Um, and it's like weirdly endearing and like sort of like the funny games where you think, is he going? Is there going to be a big climax or something? She kind of just dunks him over into the water. And such a simple story. I guess it's aliens. I mean, it's a little cheesy, but I guess cheesy does not bother me a bit. But but if the revelation that I guess they're aliens. I mean, that's kind of the ending. Huh, I guess they're aliens. Um, but the dunking into the water. I mean, just dumping him over into the water. It's intense in a similar sort of way that Funny Games is. But yeah, I mean, if you have that basic dynamic, if you're really boiling it down to your most basic, your purest sort of narrative, which horror is really good at, all you really need is just really intense visceral imagery. You need, that's right there, breaking down of the facade, that paradoxical breaking down of the facade. But also recognition of the schema, and the schema, really tightened down schema can be extremely effective. Very simple dynamic, if you have shifts in that dynamic, it can have really tremendous visceral effect. So, and that, I mean, the complaint that a lot of people have about superhero movies, I'm dedicated wholeheartedly to all of them, of course, but is they're all to these big level world-ending events, and you'll hear people say, why can't it be just a more intimate sort of story? And in the comics, they're sort of set up on these different levels of schema. Just as an example of how you could shift the schema, you have the cosmic characters where the universe is under threat. You have worldwide superheroes. You have the local sort of street level heroes. And their threats are going to be different, and the stories can have as much impact. It's just the scale of the story is just slightly different. Whereas horror, you could have the scale. It could be like a worldwide zombie attack, but commonly it's a much smaller sort of a scale. It's a house, for example. Very frequently, it's just a house. Where somebody's invading, or it's a haunting or something like that, and people are getting picked off one by one. But horror can really even ratchet it way down, and it's just two people, and the invasion is in one person's body. And that's just an amazing thing that horror is capable of doing. What do you think about that, Maggie? I just watched a horror story with a character named Maggie. There's a horror story called Emily, which does a lot of that kind of same sort of stuff. It's a bit of a slightly larger scale. But it's very disturbing in some ways that are surprising. Emily, I mean, it's very disturbing in some surprising ways, for sure. But it does that too. It ratchets it way down, and it has this very narrow sort of focus on essentially 4 characters, and there's 3 other characters. But, Honeymoon does that with just 2 characters. And just one character going through this really intense experience. And the other character sort of getting paranoid, and, he has the psychological effect. She has the physical and psychological effect. He has the psychological effect. But a fascinating movie, was under the radar for a lot of people. It might end up on the list later. I don't know. It might have just been totally forgotten about everybody, but definitely one to check out in your local Cineplex. I give it 2 thumbs up. Anyway, I'll see you on the next episode.